All right, good day, everyone. I'm Kim Kluche, Assistant Director of Archaeology and Heritage Management with the Heritage Conservation Branch at the Ministry of Parks, Culture, and Sport. This is the third and final day of our winter webinar series. Welcome back to everyone who took in last week's presentations, and greetings to those just joining us today. To begin, I respectfully acknowledge that here in Regina, we are in Treaty 4 territory. These are the traditional lands of the Cree, the Nakota, Lakota, and Dakota, the Anishinaabe, and the homeland of the Métis. In today's presentation, we will learn about Wanuskewin's path to UNESCO. Wanuskewin Heritage Park is a for-purpose organization that was created through the efforts of the community. Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders and innovators shared a common goal: to preserve the bountiful cultural heritage resources within Pimahawk Creek and to create a facility that would allow for meaningful interpretation of those resources. 3 decades later, Wanuskewin was in a position to dream bigger, and UNESCO World Heritage Site inscription became the new common goal for the organization and community. Before introducing our speakers, I'll again remind everyone to please keep your microphones and cameras turned off during the presentations. I'll ask that you hold questions until the end of the hour. You can also put questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can once the presentation concludes. Our presenters from Wanuskewin Heritage Park are Dr. Ernie Walker, Chief Archaeologist, Darlene Brander, Chief Executive Officer, and Janaea Chutskoff, UNESCO Lead. I'll now turn it over to Wanuskewin to begin their presentation.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm Darlene. I'm going to start us off. I'm so happy that we're able to present to you folks Heritage Conservation Branch. Earlier on in the year, Janaea Chutskoff and I got a chance to present at the Parks, Culture, and Sport meeting, and it was a really great event. We had a great time presenting, and so we looked forward to presenting to you and sharing our journey with you. We think it's a sensational one, and we're glad that you're interested. Today with us, of course, you know that Dr. Ernie Walker will be talking, and he's going to be focusing in on the history and the research. You're going to hear back from me again. I will be focusing in on the 4 pillars. And the third pillar that I'm going to talk about is really going to be a kind of like a baton. And I'm going to hand it over to Janaea, where she's going to talk about UNESCO. And I think it's going to be really interesting for you folks there, because in terms of heritage and archaeology, we've got a really sensational story. It's a Saskatchewan story, it's a story for the nation, and it's a story that's UNESCO worthy. So we're excited for you to be a part of that. Janae, are we able to pop up the mission value and mission and vision for the folks?
Sure, Kim, I'm not sure if you have the slides up. We can't see them. So if you do have the slides up, if you're able to go on to the second slide where it shows our mission and vision.
Okay, I'm just going to do that right now.
Thank you.
Okay, so while Kim is doing that, and by the way, thanks to the 2 Kims that are keeping us, keeping the ship steady as we go throughout this entire presentation. We appreciate your technical ability and expertise. In front of you, you do see the introduction to Wanuskewin. So you'll see that at Wanuskewin that we do have a mission and vision, and our mission is to advance the understanding and appreciation of the evolving cultures of the Northern Plains Indigenous people. And our vision is that Wanuskewin will be a living reminder of the people's sacred relationship with the land. And here at Wanuskewin, all that we do today and in the past and into the future is all in regards to supporting that mission and vision. And really, we've got a really storied history in connection to research. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our good friend, Dr. Ernie Walker, park founder and incredible storyteller and legend in his own right, to carry on with the history and research.
Next slide, please, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. And it's a pleasure to be able to present to this group. I recognize a lot of names here. Some of them are my former students. And so I'm going to assume, though, that everyone doesn't know anything about Wanuskewin and kind of start at the beginning. The area that we now know as Wanuskewin has a medicine wheel. And for those of you that don't know, it's a boulder alignment, an alignment of stones, a central mound, much like the hub of a wheel, stones much around in a circular manner like the rim of a wheel. And some of them have radiating lines. The one that we have here does not. This is the most northerly medicine wheel on the plains, and it was known way back in the 1930s. Let me jump forward. My first involvement with what is now Wanuskewin was helping an old rancher with his animals. And this is really the gem of this whole story. There was no place that you could go on this property and you wouldn't find artifacts, the usual thing, stone tools, lithic materials, bone, charcoal, some pottery, eroding out of basically everywhere. And I told that old fellow about this stuff, that we need to pay attention to it. And I didn't think he cared. But I'm going to date myself here. We're back in 1979 and 1980. And that old rancher decided he wanted to retire. And he said, sell my land to somebody that will look after it. He was truly listening the whole time. This set into motion the idea that we had to find money to buy it, this property, to preserve it. Was no easy feat, believe me. Ultimately, the province of Saskatchewan and the city of Saskatoon got together, purchased the property, held that area that had heritage sites in abeyance, and this became the gem of the park. Now, we started a research project in 1980 here at the park, and I'm almost a little bit embarrassed to tell you it ran for 40 years. Who does archaeological research at a single location for 40 years? You've got to understand that this park is not typical in that it's not a government facility at any level. It's not a federal park. It's not a provincial park. It's not a municipal park. As Kim said in her remarks, this is a community project. We decided that this was important, and we went down that road to preserve it. I remember clearly at the same time that was all happening, I was having a discussion with some of the early contributors, and we suggested this is about First Nations culture history. They should be a part of it. I'm talking 1981 and 1982. Pretty radical thinking back in those days. We worked through some elders, some friends of mine, and that blossomed, and it continues to this day. This is really outstanding, that how the community, both First Nations and non-First Nations, came together to build this facility. I remember in the early days, we wanted to have a lab here in the original building, an archaeological lab. And my colleague said, we can't afford it. And the elder said, we need to have a lab. This is important. And one elder told me he was watching us excavate, and he said to me, every time you find a new level, you're turning the page of our history book. I thought that was just particularly lovely. The images that you see up on the screen here, the one on the left, the black and white, you'll see the complex stratigraphy that we encounter at these sites. This is about halfway through. This deposit was that distance again, but the individual in the foreground is Andy Watney from Red Pheasant First Nation. That photograph was taken in 1985. And so we were doing top-notch research, including with First Nation students way back when. I did an assessment of this property in 1982 and 1983 and identified 19 archaeological deposits. Now, I don't want to get into the details of the archaeology of this today, but what you need to know is these include bison jumps. These include really massive habitation sites, campsites in the bottom of a Pimahau Creek. These include teepee rings, of course, the medicine wheel that I mentioned. And as of late, and I'll come back and talk a little bit about this, some petroglyphs found in the park. There are better medicine wheels. There are better bison jumps. There are probably deeper and older campsites, but nowhere do you find all of these things together within 58 hectares. It is a relatively small geographical area in which all of these sites are located, and they go back 6,000 years. The archaeological record here speaks for itself. It's continuous. There is no group that we identify, an archaeological group in pre-contact history, that is not represented in the park. Everybody came here at one time or another. And you can almost think about this as it functioned like kind of a magnet, drawing these people in to this small location. We did those 40 years of excavations for a variety of reasons. One, we needed to raise the money initially to purchase the park. And back in those days, I don't mind telling you, I would talk to anybody who would listen. Been thrown out all kinds of places for talking about this. I remember, and I love to tell the story, one city councilor, I was giving this presentation in city council chambers about why we needed to preserve this area just north of the city. One city councilor said, this is old bones and buffalo chips and nobody's going to give a damn about it. The downside to that is I was a little frustrated, newly minted young faculty member, and I was standing in the foyer of City Hall, and the local media said, what did you think of so-and-so councilor's remarks? And I blurted out, if I wanted to find old bones and buffalo chips, city council chambers would be the first place I looked. And they published it in the newspaper the next day. Not an auspicious start. Well, as time went on, we had to develop to save this. There was no way we could let these archaeological deposits just lie fallow. Rapidly growing urban area is still today. And so we decided it had to be developed to save it. And that brought forth the idea of building a heritage park. I think there were a lot of people in Saskatoon who didn't even know what a heritage park was. So that took some time, and the archaeology was fueling, keeping the interest up. There's something out there, it's important. First Nations elders, a lot of spiritual people, old elders that you don't really find much anymore, were on board on this. In fact, one elder, we had a large sweat ceremony in 1984, and that's the day that a decision was going to be made, is the Indigenous community in or not? And after the sweat was over, the elder says, we're in, for educational reasons. I won't go into the details of that, but one elder, his name was Lawrence Tobacco, he said to me, Ernie, we don't really know what a heritage park is. We don't know what that is. The real reason why we're going to do this, we're going to join you, is we think it was supposed to happen all along. He was speaking spiritually as if it was a prophecy. Well, I think Saskatchewan, we have good ideas, but we never have any money. It took us over a decade to raise money to build the original building, which opened in June of 1992. Great fanfare, but I knew the building was too small the day it opened. That's the resources we had available. All the while, archaeological research is continuing because it's fueling the interpretive programs of the park. This is something that you could have thought probably would happen. But as I recall, more and more people were coming down into the valley to see these excavations, asking questions about it. It was an educational process for the community. We persevered. I think in the early days of Wanuskewin, post-1992, it struggled a little bit because it wasn't sure what its mandate was. Is it a museum? Is it an educational facility? Is it a cultural center? And so forth. And it was difficult to keep all of these balls in the air at the same time. So we struggled initially, but persevered. We're tenacious. We can be aggressive. In 2015, our exhibits were getting a little dated. Our trail system needed to be updated. The archaeology is continuing. We approached our business community and asked them, would you be willing to contribute some money to refurbish our exhibits? What they said was, if you can tell us how this will be magnificent, if you can tell us how this will be unique, we'd be willing to go a little bit farther with you. Well, what did that mean? The answer was the gold standard UNESCO World Heritage designation. No easy feat. Remember, not a government facility. So the bar is now set even higher. And archaeological research continued, fueling that campaign, which was called Thundering Ahead. The target was to raise $25 million nationally. We raised $38 million nationally. Wanuskewin has a business component to it. Who comes through that front door pays bills. And so you might think this is complex. This is a very complicated operation with a lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved in it, a lot of agencies and so forth. And you'd be right. So here we are. We've done this archaeological research. It continues. 1,000 students perhaps have been through here. I think it sets the tone. My position at the University, Plains Archaeology, was kind of built on this. This is important for the life history of the park. So here we are. The UNESCO bid is ongoing. We are preparing our submission. What we need to do here is tell the rest of the world why this place is so important. What is so unique about this place, and you remember my remarks, it functioned like a magnet. Certainly over the 6,000 years of occupation here, a value was placed on this property, on this small little geographical locale. How do you move from a space to a place? What's the difference between the two? A geographical feature, how does it become a place? And the answer is it attains value. Human groups, human communities put a value on this place. My thinking is, the research I think bears this out, maybe initially the value was an economic one. And what I mean by that is, it's no accident that we have these bison jumps. The embankments of Opimihaw Creek Valley are ideally suited for driving bison over the escarpment. You can see the image in the middle. I'm holding that tray. There's a 3,000-year-old bison skull on that tray from a site called Wolf Willow. 97 to 98% of all of the bone that we have excavated from sites over 40 years, campsites, bison kills, are bison. Very, very clearly, the story of Wanuskewin is tied up with bison procurement, an economic value. But it became more than that. People started to congregate in this 58-hectare property. The campsites bear this out. You see that, again, that excavation on the left, how complex that is. That's reproduced many, many times. I'm saying that a social value was placed on this Wanuskewin property. Now, you've got to understand that when you're in the throes of a UNESCO bid, they demand what is called tangible evidence. You can't just talk about it. You have to actually be able to show the international community, via artifacts perhaps, that this story actually exists. The tangible evidence for the economic value is an easy one. All those bison bones, all of those broken tools. On the social community side, it's things like items of personal adornment, things that people wore, gaming pieces, those kinds of more social activities. And I think that very clearly, because of these massive campsites, there was a social value placed on this. But I could go further. I think there's a spiritual value was placed on Wanuskewin, on Opimao Creek and adjacent environs. And the evidence for that, the tangible evidence, is very clearly the medicine wheel and now these petroglyphs. I've got to tell you, Darlene and I were in New Mexico, and we were lamenting about the fact that, you know, we've got all these different kinds of sites, pretty much everything you would expect to find on the Northern Plains, but we don't have any examples of rock art. Well, in 2019, we brought bison back to the park. I'm going to talk about them in just a minute, but in 2020, less than a year since we brought them back, our bison manager and I were up feeding animals, and we were just watching these bison in a paddock. And they denuded all the vegetation. They wallow up there, they roll around, give themselves dust bath. So they had exposed what was underneath the surface. And lo and behold, it's a miracle. I looked at my boots, and there was a boulder protruding through the ground, and it had a big engraving on it. I thought it was old implement damage. But when we brushed it off, it's very clearly a ribstone, a hoofprint tradition rock art image. These lines mimic the ribs of a skeleton with a little horned spirit figure running right down the middle. Yes, there was a spiritual value placed on this place, and we have tangible evidence of that. Very clearly, I think that those petroglyphs are located about 800 meters due west of a bison kill called Wanuskewin. I named that site Wanuskewin back in 1982. And in Cree, it means 4 stones. And 40 years later, those pesky bison found 4 petroglyphs. Strange. It's more than that. I've become now thinking about what the Wanuskewin story really is. There are, you know, everyone says, well, the plains, the Great Plains, the prairies are flat and boring and there's nothing out there. The area around Wanuskewin is anything but. For certain geological reasons, there are these magnificent vistas, view sheds, if you like, 18 kilometers from the front of that medicine wheel to a ridge line way over east of Saskatoon. I think the vistas are important. Now you might say, well, is that tangible evidence or is that intangible evidence? I can't go back into the head of the people that were living here, but I'm pretty sure that medicine wheel was placed exactly where it is because of the vista. Now these things are going to form the basis of the submission to UNESCO. This is not easy, it's complicated, it's expensive, it's political. But the story, I think, where we're going with this, we've been through a few iterations. We think that the 58 hectares, we could think of it as one site with 19 components. The various archaeological sites are a component of one area. Call it an archaeological landscape if you like. But that's that area where the attraction, that's what was drawing these people to this place. You know, it's difficult to talk about hard science and radiocarbon dates and identifying this and that and stone tools. When you get into trying to demonstrate to people the world over, the committee that will be evaluating our submission, to get them to understand there's no gold here. There's no jade here. There are no Phoenician ores here. This is stones and bones archaeology because we are dealing with communities, people who were mobile bison hunters. Here today, gone tomorrow. No built structures, no Great Walls of China, no pyramids, no cathedrals in downtown Cologne, Germany. Some people might say it's very ephemeral. It's very subtle. You really have to be able to use your imagination a bit to see this. I don't think that denigrates this at all. For me, it is the best example of the Great Plains of North America, what pre-contact bison hunting lifestyle was like. Now, I mentioned that we brought bison back. This is a heritage story, a little bit different one, but one I think that is really germane to what Wanuskewin's all about. The original animals we brought in December of 2019 were 4 small heifer calves from Grasslands National Park. And this is a complex story, but all you really need to know is those animals in grasslands in southwestern Saskatchewan were descended from one of the big progenitor herds, the last of the American bison in the United States in the 1870s and early 1880s, called the Pablo Allard herd, and they were located in west central Montana. That's as far as we thought we would go. However, we had some connections in the United States with a group that had animals from Yellowstone in Wyoming. Yellowstone genetics are impossible to get these days. We were able to bring a bull and 4 bred cows that have Yellowstone genetics, descendants of the Yellowstone herd. President Ulysses S. Grant designated Yellowstone as the first national park in the world in 1872. And these are descendant animals from the animals that were there during that day. We have now put those 2 groups together, and their offspring are animals that haven't been seen on the plains in 150 years. That's a heritage story all of its own. What you need to know is that this is kind of like having a tiger by the tail. Who would ever thought? I wished I could be sitting in the bottom of the valley with that old rancher and with some of those old elders, those old spiritual elders from the early days, so they could see what came of this. Remember what I said. Elder Lawrence Tobacco said it was supposed to happen all along. And now I'm the old guy and I look back, I think he was exactly right.
Thank you. Thanks, Ernie. That was a wonderful overview of our history and the research that goes on here. Kim, if you just slide to the next slide there, I'm just going to quickly talk. I know that we've got 15 minutes left, and I want to leave the majority of it for Janaea. But what you heard, folks, really was the Thundering Ahead Renewal Project pillars. And so we talked about the return of the bison to the land. Well, that happened in December of 2019. And as an Indigenous woman, it was a really powerful experience to see our brothers and sisters returning back to the land. It was a cultural renewal. It was a spiritual renewal. And also it had impacts on our land and really set the stage for more heritage to come in the future. That first pillar that you see is the International Center of Excellence. The Thundering Ahead campaign, as a result, we were able to help create, expand and renovate an International Center of Excellence. When you come to Wanuskewin, and we invite you out to Wanuskewin, you're going to see a wonderful facility both inside and outside. Our facility at Wanuskewin is just over 53,000 square feet. That's expanded. We've got bison facilities and we've got 7 kilometers of trails. We've got a fantastic park encapsulated in 741 acres. So it's fairly large. We know in 30 or 40 years that we're going to be surrounded by the city of Saskatoon. That'll be great. And I just want to let you guys know something that in New York City, Central Park is a little over, I think, 800 acres. So, you know, we're right on the cusp of becoming one of the world's great parks, and it's just going to take a little bit more time. Within that time, we've also working on the Saskatchewan story. Within the 4 pillars, we have the preserved ecological island. So, Kim, when you mentioned Omaha Valley, that's within that preserved ecological island, and so Oklahoma Valley. If you take a look to where Janaea is, right behind her, that's Oklahoma Valley, and it's one of our great treasures here at Wanuskewin, and it's a site of 19 archaeological dig sites where Ernie has dedicated 40 years of his life that we are so thankful for. And you know, when I came to Wanuskewin 4 years ago, 4 quick years ago, I came because I wanted to help contribute to conserving the past and preserving it. I wanted to thrive in the future, and I wanted to realize our future. And what really tied that together was UNESCO. And so what UNESCO does, what it stands for, what it means a lot. It's not only a Wanuskewin story, it's a Saskatchewan story with each one of you serving as stewards and we hope advocates for this very story. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janaea to give us a little snippet of the UNESCO process.
Thanks, Darlene. Kim, could you flip to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to obviously speak about our particular UNESCO journey. I might just give a tiny bit of background information on the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. I recognize that most of you probably understand this quite well. So in the 1970s, the United Nations came together and determined that they wanted to preserve and conserve natural and cultural sites across the world. And so they came up with the convention that led to UNESCO, so United Nations Educational, Social, and Cultural Organization. So UNESCO meets annually in Paris. The committee designates anywhere between 20 to 35 in the past, I think, 10, 15 years, 20 to 35 sites globally a year as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. In 2015, as Ernie mentioned, he talked about that we had gone to business organizations in the community and discussed revitalization of the park. And we were tasked with dreaming bigger. And as Ernie mentioned, one of those bigger dreams was UNESCO. So Ernie worked diligently with some park staff, and in 2017, after some documentation was compiled and an original OUV was drafted at that time, Parks Canada, through the state party of Canada, designated Wanuskewin onto the Canadian tentative list. So in 2017, we made it onto the tentative list, which essentially kickstarts the work in the background to get the formal nomination completed. We have been working since then. What I will discuss next is the concept of the nomination dossier, as well as the process that we are undergoing for this particular nomination dossier. So the dossier has 3 main components. The first component is the argument of why a site, in this case Wanuskewin, should have UNESCO World Heritage designation. That includes a statement of outstanding universal value. So a draft one, again, was created for the tentative list. However, that's very typically not the final one. And as I've learned, and Ernie has reminded me many times, it's an iterative process. So there are many versions of this statement of outstanding universal value until you get to your final nomination document. It's actually a rather short, very, very limited in terms of words and characters to be able to make that argument. There's a ton of information that goes behind it to support that argument, etc. But it's a very interesting, difficult exercise in needing to be encapsulate all of the things, but also be as concise as possible. So that's the overview of the why Wanuskewin should be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The next component is management plans. So that is something that we have also been working concurrently with drafting the statement of OUV. We've been working concurrently on management plans. And when I talk about management plans, I guess that's a little bit narrow, as it's not just plans, but it's also governance, policies, procedures, legislation, all of the things. So essentially you can look at management in 2 ways. You can look at it as protection, which is the governance and authority side of things. What measures are in place that have protection elements through legislation, high-level regulations, policies, those kinds of things. And then the other side is the management, the site management. So that's great that you have these structures in place, but what are the kind of boots on the ground things that you're doing to be able to manage the site itself, the collections, etc. So that's the second component. Obviously, both of these components are very large. I know it might sound like, oh, that's simple, but these are actually quite massive documents, usually between 150 to 200 pages for the nomination. And then the third component is the annexes. So that is all of the backup information that that flows into the information in the first two components. Just for a frame of reference, Writing on Stone, Ace and AP, which was nominated in 2019, their appendices were 3,000 pages long. So there's a lot of information that goes into that as well. And that, I'm sure most of you know, is going to be a lot of work to compile and make sure it's referenced properly. So those are the three main components. There is actually a guideline. It's called the operational guidelines that UNESCO puts in place, and there's chapters in essence. They're not titled chapters, but there's section 2.1, etc. So there are 9 chapters in total. Really, only 5 of them have a lot of meat to them. Some of them are just, sign off, short identification of the property, that kind of thing. But generally, the sections are those 3 sections that I've mentioned. All of this information also needs to follow fall underneath one or more, usually one, of several criteria that UNESCO puts in place for a natural or cultural site. Wanuskewin will very, very, very likely, I want to say yes, but I'm always hesitant to say yes. I'm learning lots about this process. We will very likely be under criteria on 3, which is an exceptional testament to a culture, living or past. Yes. So that is what we will be applying under. Ernie kind of gave you a bit of information about what that OUB will look like, about how a site takes on meaning in terms of a place. Obviously, that is something that needs to be crafted really, really well. It needs to be understood globally. It needs to be understood that has global significance. And it also needs to ultimately balance that kind of two-eyed seeing of being representative appropriately culturally of the significance of the site, as well as being sure to have that tangible evidence and the research and the backup that's required. So it's really important that you walk that line appropriately, so that telling the authentic story of the site, and you're also covering the points necessary to be able to get that designation. So in terms of all of that work that I've mentioned that we've been doing, it is very crucial, and UNESCO makes it very obvious that it's crucial through a multitude of documents that papers and documents that they've produced, that this is not a one-man show. In fact, they don't like to see it be a one-man show. Even if, one organization can do all of the things required, they don't like to see that. They recognize that a lot of the organizations that are in charge of these sites are typically nonprofits, smaller organizations, smaller budgets, those kinds of things, and don't necessarily have all of the expertise necessary to be able to manage the site on their own. So in recognition of that, Wanuskewin is, I think, well positioned in that we have long history of relationships with many partner organizations. So we've been working with a multitude of stakeholders over the past 4 months now. We started in November to have working groups. So we have identified categories for those working groups to be able to make sure that site management, the activities that are happening boots on the ground, we're working with experts from those organizations to ensure that we have the information that we need. We're considering how those things might impact other organizations, and how those organizations might have processes or mechanisms that we can tap into, etc. We are also working on the governance side of things. So there are a few organizations that we're working with to determine how governance can be strengthened to be able to support our UNESCO designation. That is so far been a really exceptional exercise, and we're really looking forward to see the outcomes of those connections with those organizations and that governance. All of this is being driven by what we've called a stewardship circle. So 7 key stakeholder organizations were identified, and there are particular reasons for each of those key stakeholders. And those stakeholders have agreed to be on the Wanuskewin UNESCO Stewardship Circle. There are several reasons that we chose that term, but the one I want to highlight is that this is not just the committee that, it's not just a steering committee that makes sure that we get UNESCO World Heritage designation. This is several community organizations, Saskatchewan-based community organizations, coming together to steward our application and steward the resources and the UNESCO designation into perpetuity. This is a very big and exciting, but very big commitment, and there's a lot of accountability. And it's really crucial that the community, as already mentioned, the beginnings of Wanuskewin came from community. The UNESCO nomination and eventual designation will also come from the community. Ernie, did I miss anything pertinent?
No, I think that's good. I would just add that criterion 3 that Janaea mentioned is about a testament to a culture, living or past. And for us, and Parks Canada has made this very clear, that the archaeology, the historical record, is what will get us there. And that started, as I said, over 40 years ago, and it's still here today because the designation will be dependent on that. I think that's significant. Everybody here is interested in heritage. And as I said earlier, things are pretty subtle out here on the prairies, on the Great Plains. It's not always easy to be able to identify that visually. This is more of a burden on us, but I think we're going to get there. This is a very special project. The last thing I'll say, and I say this in public presentations, Wanuskewin wants to become a World Heritage Site. This place is dying to become a World Heritage Site. That's why it keeps giving us these little gifts, petroglyphs, very special bison with their pedigree, the phenomenal archaeological record here. All of these things, I think, bode well for us in the future.
One last thing I'll maybe mention that, first of all, I will also mention that I'm an accountant by trade, so I appreciate all of your backgrounds. This is a very incredibly deep and interesting subject area, and I've had to do a lot of learning. And one thing that I've connected with our UNESCO journey recently is traditional Iroquois teaching of 7 generations, and so decisions are made based on the impact 7 generations into the future. And if that's not what we're doing here, then I don't know what it is we're doing here. That is exactly what this is about.
Well, thank you, Janaea, and thank you, Dr. Ernie Walker. Kim and all of you fine folks from Heritage Conservation Branch, I want to thank you for joining us. We told you that we were going to finish at 12:45, and we will deliver that promise to you. And Kim's, we will open it back to you. If you've got any questions for us, or if you want to take the reins, as they say, and we're open for questions.
Okay, yes, thank you again, Dr. Walker, Darlene, and Janaea. Wanuskewin is a great example of the journey a community can take to take on that heritage site from inception and all the way to obtaining world recognition. And there's lots of work to be done on this path to UNESCO, and community support is definitely a big component of that. So as Darlene mentioned, we now have time for questions. So feel free to unmute your mic to ask a question, or raise your hand, or write it down in the chat. I haven't had a chance to look at any in there quite yet. What did it do? But now is the time for people to raise any questions.
So while people are formulating their questions, I do want to just say thank you to the Heritage Branch. Within the technical advisory group, we do have some superstars from the province of Saskatchewan that have joined us with their expertise. And I do want to say thank you very much for contributing your expertise to leaving a legacy for Saskatchewan. And as we all know, this is a Saskatchewan story, and it's really exciting because we do get to leave a legacy. And I'm going to be gone, and Ernie and Janaea will be gone in about 100 years or so, maybe sooner. But during that time, we want to make sure that we honor that past, and we're able to capture the legacy. And I think that kind of lines up beautifully with what work that you do over at the Heritage Conservation Branch as well.
All right, I'm surprised that there's no questions.
We either did a really good job and there are no
Right?
questions, or we did a really bad job and everybody's sleeping.
I know, I was very interested in it. Okay, we do have Penny, you have your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
I was just wondering if there is further possibilities of that this site would have been continued on besides just the original spot. Like I'm thinking of along the riverside, going downtown Saskatoon area. Is there any possibility of any exploration there?
Geographically, that's what you're getting at. Ernie, you probably have the best answer for that one.
Well, if I interpret the question properly, the question is, if we were to look farther afield, would we find more sites? Over that 40 years, I prowled through the city of Saskatoon. I've excavated sites right in the middle of the city, people's backyards, under streets, in alleys, in the landfill. The thing about Wanuskewin is if you walk 100 meters, let's say, out of that 58 hectare plot, out of the protected area, you won't find a flake. Those agricultural fields are barren. So the answer is no. There might be a few scatters, lithic scatters. I'm not aware of them, but in terms of archaeological sites, it's really concentrated, as I said, within that 58 hectare area.
Okay, we have another question from Danelle. Are there ways that citizens can get involved to volunteer or help with this project?
I'll send you my email address. Absolutely. So yes, as mentioned, there is specific expertise that we are reaching out to, but we don't know everyone in the community, and we're very happy to take on volunteers in a multitude of ways. We're actually working on expanding that internally for more capacity to bring in volunteers, and specifically on this project, I'd love to hear from you, and we can chat about what way that might work. So yes, I will maybe ask Kim to pass on the contact information.
So
I can put it in. Oh, sorry, I was going to say I can put it right now. It's your controller email, correct, Janea?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
now we've been thinking about that as well, and how can we get people more involved? And we've talked about the concept of, Ernie, can you say it for, because I always pronounce it wrong.
Docent.
The docent, yes.
Docent system.
And it's an exciting concept, we feel.
In the United States, at many of the big National Park Service parks, and even some smaller state-run facilities, they have what are called docents. These are people in the community who volunteer. Many of them might have specific areas of expertise, and they become kind of a very knowledgeable group that the park can rely on. There are special events for docents. You keep them together as a group. And we think that this would be a really good idea for Wanuskewin. I'm very familiar with it, seen it in action. One of the problems is for Wanuskewin, though, right at the moment, we're so knee deep into the submission to UNESCO that it's sometimes hard to branch out. But I think the docent system is definitely going to appear at Wanuskewin.
And we have started to take steps in that direction. So we have a volunteer coordinator on site who's been working at determining areas for general community volunteers as well as volunteers with specific expertise. And so, yes, please reach out to me. I'm excited to hear from you, but also on our website, there is an opportunity to sign up as a volunteer, and you can tick off certain areas of expertise, certain areas of interest. And then, we can have that communication back and forth about what that might look like. So we are hoping to move that direction, but it is a long process. And obviously we are a tad bit preoccupied with the nomination process itself.
Christian has a great question that I thought was going to be asked, and so you have delivered, Christian. So Christian's question was about how long is the nomination process from the beginning to the end? And the answer is, it depends. So Canada has about 20 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and for each one of them, they have taken different lengths of time. Janine, correct me if I'm wrong, but some have taken up to 20 years
Yes.
to take, and it's due to a number of reasons. So in terms of Wanuskewin, your next question maybe, Christian, is that what does Wanuskewin project? Well, we're projecting, we'd like to say 2025 when we'll get the designation, but it may be longer than that. And really, so you need to know our good friends at Parks Canada, who we submit our nomination package into. Ultimately, they decide because the state is the one who determines when the nomination package is ready enough for successful submission. And we as a submitter, we want to make sure that we have a very successful submission. So we will always do our best to ensure that we've got a great nomination package in, and we'll take the direction from Parks Canada when they feel that it is the right time to successfully take it forward. So in the near future is probably a good answer for us, I would say.
Yeah, so if you look back at, I'm thinking the original tentative list submission probably began in 2016 at some point. And so we're projecting 2025 or soon thereafter. So it's about a 10-year process. To be fair, there's a couple of years of COVID in there that threw a wrench in our focus area. But again, as Darlene mentioned, there are some sites that it could take 20 plus years. Wanuskewin is, I don't want to say uniquely positioned, but well positioned compared to potentially some other sites in that there's already a long archaeological record. The research is there. So those 3,000 pages of appendices, a lot of that content is already there. We don't have to start with that work. Also, because the organization exists, there is a structure, there is a governance structure. Yes, there are some things that may need to be tweaked, but generally there is an organizational structure. We're not building anything from the ground up. So ultimately, the timeline that we're in is probably average or potentially on the shorter side. There's also a new process that Parks Canada is putting in play that will probably the minimum number of years you'd be able to do it in is 5 to 7, and that would be very exponential. Very exponential.
So with that, Kim, we'll hand it back over to you. I know that it's getting about 5 minutes to 1 p.m. and you're in the driver's seat, so we're at your disposal here.
Okay, yeah, so we'll close it up. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. So thank you very much to our presenters today and to those from last week as well. We couldn't do these webinars without them generously taking the time to be with us to share the stories of their projects. And thank you to all our guests for coming out today. So, and that's it. That wraps up our winter webinar series. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Right now.